I slammed the brakes in my own driveway, my heart hammering as disbelief hit me all at once. I punched the garage opener. It shrieked, then froze halfway up. Inside were two enormous, filthy trucks crammed into my garage. Diesel fumes burned my lungs. Oil stains spread across my concrete floor. Anger surged instantly. This wasn't a mistake. This was a home invasion. And there she was, standing squarely in my space. Delilah Thornberry, the HOA vice president everyone whispered about. Clipboard clutched like a weapon. That smug smile. That effortless arrogance. What the hell are your trucks doing in my garage? I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. Emergency protocol, she sneered. I have master access keys for the good of the community. One truck belonged to an HOA board member. The other was her husband's oversized monster. They'd slipped in while I was gone and left me a violation notice on top of it all. This power-drunk HOA queen had picked the wrong homeowner. The reckoning that followed, pure chaos, absolute justice, was unforgettable. Her meltdown? Priceless. What would you do? Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. Because I'm about to explain who made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. My name is Ezra Caldwell. I'm 52 years old. Third-generation machinist. I bleed motor oil and American steel. 12 hours a day, I manufacture precision aerospace components that keep fighter jets in the sky. My hands are scarred from decades of honest work, hardened from tools most people can't pronounce. 6 months ago, my Aunt Millicent passed away and left me her modest 1960s ranch house in Maplewood Heights. What I believe was a quiet subdivision where neighbors waved and kept to themselves. My home sits on a corner lot with a detached single-car garage that barely fits my pride and joy. My father's fully restored 1985 Chevy pickup. That truck represents 3 generations of Caldwell sweat equity. Every bolt, every wire, every layer of paint applied with respect. But I wasn't the only one eyeing that garage. Delilah Thornberry, the self-appointed ruler of suburbia, had been circling my property like a vulture for months. She saw herself as the sheriff of the neighborhood, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, manicured nails that had never touched real work, a Mercedes SUV worth more than my annual salary. For 8 years, she'd terrorized Maplewood Heights as HOA vice president, measuring lawns with rulers, photographing violations like criminal evidence. Her husband owned Thornberry Construction. Conveniently, every violation notice came with a recommendation for their services. 3 weeks ago, the city announced street resurfacing. Normal people would ask neighbors for parking help, not Princess Delilah. She declared select driveways priority zones for her allies and labeled my garage emergency overflow parking, no permission, no notice, not a single word to the actual owner. That night, surrounded by the musty smell of old cardboard boxes, I went through Aunt Millicent's stored paperwork, searching for anything that could help me. The rough texture of decades-old documents felt heavy in my hands as I dug deeper. Then I found it, buried beneath Christmas cards and recipe clippings. The original 1962 subdivision deed. My hands trembled as I unfolded the yellowed paper. According to the original survey, my corner lot included 15 feet of land the HOA had claimed as common area for 60 years. The community garden, the entrance fountain, even part of the community center where Delilah held her little tribunals, all built on my land. Delilah thought she was stealing my garage. She had no idea she actually owned half her kingdom on my property. The implications hit me like lightning. Every monthly HOA assessment for landscaping, every community service, paid for by homeowners, every board meeting held on land they didn't legally own. It wasn't just theft. It was a systematic theft of authority. And the timing couldn't have been better. While those trucks sat locked inside my garage, I suddenly had the legal ammunition to destroy her entire operation. Delilah assumed she was dealing with another easy target, a homeowner who would quietly pay fines and follow orders. She did no research on the machinist who doesn't just fix problems. He engineers solutions. The distant hum of road construction equipment down the street seemed to mock her emergency as I studied the deed by lamplight. The acrid smell of fresh printer ink from her violation notice mixed with diesel fumes still lingering in my garage. Tomorrow, I would file trespassing charges. But tonight, I planned something much bigger. Princess Delilah had picked the wrong property to steal, and she was about to discover that her entire empire sat on land that legally belonged to me. The next morning, police officers, a tow truck, and the smuggest HOA Karen in history converged on my driveway. Officers, Delilah shrieked, pointing at my locked garage like I committed a federal crime. This man has illegally imprisoned our vehicles. He's holding community property hostage. The lead officer, a weathered veteran who looked like he'd handled suburban drama before, examined my garage door and the trucks visible through the windows. Ma'am, these vehicles are parked on his private property. That's trespassing. Trespassing. Delilah's voice climbed into a pitch that could shatter glass. This was emergency parking authorized under HOA bylaws. I handed the officer copies of my property deed and the HOA regulations. Officer, there is no emergency parking clause that allows seizure of private garages. I said, I never consented to vehicle storage. While Delilah sputtered, I continued. Furthermore, I have discovered this woman has been claiming ownership of property that legally belongs to me for 60 years. I produced a 1962 subdivision deed, yellow with age, but clear in its measurements. This original survey shows my property line extends 15 feet into what the HOA calls common area. I said, her husband's construction company has been billing the HOA for maintenance on my land. The officer's eyebrows shot up as he compared the original deed to current property maps. Even Delilah's bluster faltered as she realized what I was holding. That document is outdated, she stammered. Boundaries change over time through adverse possession. Adverse possession requires hostile open use without the owner's consent. I interrupted, recalling my father's property law lessons. When boundaries are simply surveyed wrong, the original deed stands. The metallic taste of victory filled my mouth as Delilah's confidence crumbled. Officer, I'm filing formal trespassing charges against Mrs. Thornberry for unauthorized use of my garage. I said, I'm demanding immediate removal of these vehicles. You can't do this, Delilah snapped, her perfect composure finally cracking. I'm the HOA vice president. I have authority. Not over my property. I replied, You don't. The tow truck operator, a grizzled guy who'd seen his fair share of neighborhood drama, scratched his head. Lady, he said, if the man wants the trucks gone, I've got to remove them. That's how property rights work. As the trucks were winched out of my garage, the sound of metal scraping concrete was like music to my ears. Each screech and groan represented another piece of Delilah's authority being stripped away. This isn't over, she hissed, climbing into her Mercedes. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, I called out, waving the 1962 deed. I know exactly who I'm messing with. Someone who's been trespassing on my land for 8 years. Her tires squealed as she fled, leaving behind the smell of burning rubber and the sweet satisfaction of justice served. But I knew this was only the opening salvo. Delilah's real escalation was coming, and I was ready for it. That afternoon brought the first wave of her retaliation. A certified letter from Thornberry Legal Services demanding $5,000 for illegal detention of commercial vehicles and interference with emergency community operations. The letter felt official in my hands. Heavy paper with embossed letterhead. But something about the legal language seemed off. I called the State Bar Association. Thornberry Legal Services. The clerk informed me. No law firm registered under that name. Sounds like someone practicing law without a license. Another felony to add to Delilah's growing pile. But her real masterstroke came that evening. I returned from my shift to find a work crew installing no parking signs along the disputed 15-foot strip of my property. Not HOA maintenance workers. Thornberry construction employees working without permits on land they didn't own. I documented everything with photos while calling the county code enforcement office. The smell of wet concrete and fresh paint filled the air as these workers provided evidence of their trespass in real time. You're trespassing, I told the crew supervisor, a nervous kid who clearly hadn't been briefed on the dispute. Ma'am said it was HOA common area, he mumbled, increasingly uncomfortable. Ma'am lied. I replied, this is private property under active legal dispute. You're destroying evidence. By the time code enforcement arrived, Delilah's crew had installed 3 concrete signposts and a decorative border fence on my land, without permits, fully documented in crystal clear photos. The code officer whistled low as he surveyed the unauthorized construction. Ladies got brass, he said. Installing permanent improvements on disputed property during active litigation. That's bold. Is it legal? Hell no. This is destruction of evidence, trespass, and unpermitted construction in a residential zone. He started writing citations faster than Delilah issued violations. The rough texture of those violation notices felt satisfying as I watched Delilah's operation implode. Every desperate move created more evidence of her criminal conspiracy. She thought locking trucks in my garage was an inconvenience. She had no idea it was the first domino in a chain reaction that would destroy her completely. Delilah's next move was pure desperation disguised as authority, and it backfired spectacularly. She organized an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss my hostile actions against community safety. The notice, printed on cheap paper, declared my garage locking an act of aggression against community welfare. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, with surprise that made Delilah's face go white. A professional surveyor, my real estate attorney, and Jessica Martinez from Channel 7 News. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced before Delilah could call her kangaroo court to order, I have information that changes everything you think you know about this HOA. The surveyor unrolled his equipment while my attorney addressed the crowd. Before this meeting begins, you should know this building sits partially on property illegally claimed by your HOA, he said. Mr. Caldwell owns 15 feet of land you've been calling common area for 60 years. Gasps rippled through the room as residents realized the implications. The entrance fountain, community garden, even the meeting hall itself, built on stolen land. That's preposterous. Delilah shrieked, clipboard shaking. Those boundaries were established decades ago by incorrect surveys. My attorney replied calmly, the original 1962 deed supersedes all subsequent surveys. Your HOA has been committing systematic trespass for 6 decades. I pulled out the yellow deed, its musty smell filling the room as I unfolded 60 years of lies. Every monthly assessment you collected for landscape maintenance, I continued. Every service you billed, every fine, stolen from me. The visual impact was devastating. Residents could see exactly what had been stolen. Their monthly fees had funded improvements on land the HOA never owned. But Jessica Martinez delivered the final blow. Mrs. Thornberry, she announced on live camera, Channel 7 has obtained financial records showing your husband's construction company received over $200,000 in HOA contract for work performed on Mr. Caldwell's property. Can you explain this apparent fraud? Delilah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The perfect suburban queen was falling apart in real time. Furthermore, my attorney continued, Mrs. Thornberry's installation of unauthorized improvements on disputed property yesterday constitutes willful destruction of evidence in an active legal case. The district attorney has agreed to pursue criminal charges. That's when Delilah snapped. This is a conspiracy, she screamed, pointing at me with trembling fingers. You locked our trucks in your garage like some kind of criminal. You're destroying our community with lies and manipulation. The irony was delicious. She was having her meltdown in a building built on my land, accusing me of crimes she committed for years. Delilah, I said, voice cutting through her hysteria like precision machine steel, I didn't destroy your community. I exposed your crimes. I turned to the residents who'd suffered under her tyranny for years. Every violation notice, I said, every fine, every threat, based on authority over land she never owned. This woman has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as community service. The room erupted into applause, shaking the walls. The trespassing charges I filed that morning were just the beginning. I continued, property fraud, embezzlement, practicing law without a license, unpermitted construction. Mrs. Thornberry has built quite a case against herself. As the crowd dispersed, Delilah sat alone at her board table, surrounded by the wreckage of her authority. Her kingdom was crumbling, and everyone could see the emperor had no clothes. The metallic taste of complete victory filled my mouth as I watched the woman who tried to steal my garage realize she'd stolen her own destruction instead. But the beautiful part was only beginning. As residents filed out, 3 neighbors approached with evidence I hadn't expected. Mrs. Rory handed me a folder thick with documentation. Delilah tried the same property grab on her flower bed 2 years ago, claiming community beautification. She kept every paper. Mr. Rodriguez showed photos of Thornberry construction trucks using his cul-de-sac for equipment storage without permission. She told him it was temporary. It wasn't. It lasted months. Mike, the contractor blacklisted for refusing to inflate estimates, revealed the smoking gun. She kept a priority list of contractors who split profits with Thornberry Construction. Pay to play. Pure and simple. Each piece of evidence felt substantial in my hands, building an unbreakable case against Delilah's operation. The rough texture of photocopied invoices, the smooth surface of digital photos, the crisp edges of official correspondence. Every piece documenting years of systematic fraud. Jessica Martinez's eyes lit up as she reviewed the mountain of evidence. "This isn't just HOA harassment," she said. "This is organized racketeering." The story just got 10 times bigger. By the time I locked my garage that night, I wasn't just protecting my property from one trespassing incident. I was a catalyst that exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been bleeding our neighborhood dry for years. Delilah's reaction was immediate. She went from confident to frantic in seconds, like a woman watching her carefully built facade collapse. She'd been exposed on live television, in front of the whole neighborhood, with her own fraud laid out in plain sight, and she couldn't handle it. That night, she launched her most reckless move yet. She filed a restraining order against me. Her claim? I was harassing and intimidating her and her family. She painted me as a violent, unstable homeowner, and her letter was full of dramatic language meant to trigger fear. She claimed I'd threatened physical harm, simply because I'd stood my ground and demanded my property back. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. I didn't panic. I expected this. Delilah's entire operation was built on bullying and intimidation. This was her last desperate attempt to regain control. So I prepared for court like I would prepare for a mission. I collected every record, every email, every photo, every witness statement. I knew her tactics. I knew she would try to paint me as the villain. But I had something she didn't. Proof. Proof that she had trespassed, lied, and abused her power for years. Proof that her community service was just a cover for extortion and corruption. 2 days before the court date, I received a new letter from the HOA. This one was a final notice. It said I was being fined $10,000 for failure to comply with community standards. It was ridiculous. My garage was clean. My lawn was trimmed. My property was in perfect condition. So why the fine? Because Delilah knew she couldn't win legally, so she tried to crush me financially. She was using the HOA as a weapon, the same way she'd always done. I wasn't intimidated. I knew exactly what to do. I contacted the county recorder's office and asked for a full title history of the property. That's when I discovered something shocking. The HOA's legal name wasn't even what the residents thought it was. The organization operating as Maplewood Heights HOA was not properly registered. The board had no legal authority. The rules they enforced were technically worthless. They had been running a fake government for years. Everything Delilah did was based on a lie. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. I also filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office. This wasn't just about my garage anymore. This was about the integrity of the entire neighborhood, and it was about stopping Delilah from ruining anyone else's life. The day of the court hearing arrived. The courthouse was quiet, except for the low murmur of people waiting for their cases. Delilah arrived with her husband and 2 of her HOA cronies, dressed in their best suits like they were going to a wedding. They looked like they were ready to win. I walked in with my attorney and my evidence folder. The judge entered the room, and the hearing began. Delilah's attorney made a show of it, speaking loudly and aggressively. "He is a dangerous man," he said. "He has threatened my client and her family." I sat silently while my attorney waited for his moment. When the judge asked me to speak, I didn't yell or accuse. I simply laid out the facts. "I am a homeowner," I said. "I discovered that the HOA has been trespassing on my property for decades. I filed a trespassing complaint and requested removal of their vehicles. They retaliated by attempting to bully me with fines and false legal claims." I handed the judge copies of the 1962 deed and the photographs of the unauthorized construction. I explained the violations, the illegal improvements, the unlicensed law firm, and the pay-to-play contracts. The judge looked through the documents carefully. Delilah's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge cut him off. "This is not a simple restraining order case," the judge said. "This is a serious matter." The judge asked Delilah why she filed a restraining order. She responded with dramatic emotion, claiming fear and harassment, but the judge saw through it. When he asked for evidence, she had none. No proof, no witnesses, just accusations. The judge denied the restraining order, and he ordered a full investigation into the HOA's operations. Delilah's face turned white. She looked like someone who had just been told her whole life was a lie. The courthouse drama didn't end there. As we left the building, I was approached by several residents who thanked me for standing up. They admitted they were afraid of Delilah and her influence. They said they'd been quietly paying fines and following rules they didn't even understand because they didn't want to be targeted. I told them, "You don't have to live like this." And I meant it. I gave them my contact information and encouraged them to come forward with any evidence they had. The next week, my phone began to ring nonstop. Neighbors called with photos of violations, copies of emails, and stories of harassment. Every new piece of evidence made Delilah's situation worse. Her empire was collapsing, but she wasn't done yet. She still had one final weapon, and she was going to use it. Delilah's final weapon wasn't legal. It wasn't financial. It was psychological. She knew her reputation was ruined. She knew the community was turning against her. And she knew the only thing left was to make me look insane. So she did what she always did when cornered. She went for the nuclear option. She staged a safety incident at my home. It was a kind of manipulation only someone with power and access could pull off. One evening, I returned from work to find my front yard flooded. Not from rain. This was deliberate. A hose had been left running. The sprinkler system had been sabotaged. Water pooled everywhere, flooding the driveway and soaking the foundation. I immediately knew who did it. Delilah had been seen near my home earlier that day, acting suspiciously. She claimed she was checking on the neighborhood, but now it was clear. She was trying to make it look like I was careless, or worse, dangerous. I called the city water department. They confirmed it was not a system failure. It was tampering. That's when I realized she wasn't just trying to ruin me. She was trying to frame me, because if I had a safety violation, she could use as evidence to justify her harassment. She could claim I was a threat to the community. And if she could get me out of the way, she could regain control. I documented everything. Photos of the flooded yard, video of the water flowing from the hose, evidence of the sabotage. Then I called the police that I explained what happened and who I believe was responsible. The officer listened carefully. "This looks like harassment," he said, "but we need more proof." I knew he was right. So I set up a hidden camera outside my home. Not because I wanted to spy on anyone, because I needed to protect myself. And within 2 days, I got what I needed. The footage showed Delilah walking onto my property after dark, turning the hose on, and walking away like she owned the place. The next day, I submitted the footage to the police and the district attorney. The reaction was immediate. They opened a full investigation into Delilah's behavior. It wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about criminal harassment and vandalism. But Delilah didn't stop. She became more desperate. She began threatening residents who spoke out. She threatened them with fines, with community consequences, and with personal retaliation. She tried to bully them into silence. But the tide had turned. People were no longer afraid. They had proof, and they were ready to stand up. That's when I received a call from one of the HOA board members, a woman named Karen, who had been quietly supporting Delilah for years. She sounded shaken. She told me that Delilah had been embezzling money from HOA funds and that she had proof. She said she was ready to come forward, but she was scared. "I don't want to lose my home," she told me. I understood. Delilah's retaliation wasn't just legal. It was personal. So I reassured her. "I will protect you," I said. "We will do this together." And we did. Karen handed over the documents. Invoices, receipts, and bank statements showing money siphoned to Thornberry Construction and personal accounts. The evidence was damning. The district attorney was furious. He told me that this wasn't just a local HOA dispute. It was a criminal conspiracy. Delilah had been running a fraudulent operation for years. And now the entire neighborhood was finally waking up to it. The investigation escalated quickly. Federal authorities became involved because of the scale of the financial fraud. Delilah's empire was collapsing under the weight of her own corruption. And the most satisfying part? She didn't see it coming. She thought she was untouchable. But the truth always catches up. The truth always finds a way. And the community finally realized what they'd been living under. Delilah wasn't a leader. She was a criminal. She was a bully. And she was finished. The knock came at 6:12 a.m. Not a polite knock. Not a neighborly knock. A law enforcement knock. When I opened the door, 2 county detectives stood on my porch, badges visible, expressions calm but serious. A third vehicle idled at the curb, unmarked government plates. "Mr. Caldwell?" one of them asked. "Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Delilah Thornberry." I stepped aside without hesitation. Inside my kitchen, they laid it all out. The hidden camera footage, the fraudulent HOA contracts, the fake legal notices, the unregistered HOA entity, the money trail leading straight to Delilah and her husband. They weren't here to question me. They were here to confirm the final pieces. "She's been interviewed," the detective said, flipping open his notebook. "She's denying everything. Says you're orchestrating a personal vendetta." I almost laughed. "Did she mention the hoes?" I asked. The detective's mouth twitched. "She did. Claimed it was a coincidence." I handed them a USB drive. "Here's the footage in full resolution. Timestamps intact. No edits." They nodded. Professionals. Methodical. Already convinced. Just verifying. Before they left, one of them paused at the door. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Most people back down when bullies escalate." I watched them drive away knowing something irreversible had begun. 3 days later, Delilah was arrested. Not at home, not quietly, but during a so-called emergency HOA meeting she called to restore order. 2 squad cars pulled up. Residents gathered. Phones came out. The charges were read out loud. Fraud, embezzlement, criminal trespass, harassment, vandalism, practicing law without a license. When the handcuffs went on, the silence was absolute. Her husband stood frozen, face gray, realizing construction contracts, the easy money, the intimidation. It was all over. The news cameras caught everything. The woman who once ruled Maplewood Heights with a clipboard was led away shaking Mascara Street, screaming that this was all a misunderstanding. No one believed her. Within a week, the HOA was suspended by the state. All fines were frozen. All enforcement ceased. Every homeowner received a notice explaining their rights. Refunds were issued. Some people cried when they opened those letters. Not because of the money, but because they realized how long they lived under fear for no reason. The community center was temporarily closed. Turns out, you can't legally operate a building that sits on stolen land. The city approached me about a settlement. They wanted to formally purchase the disputed 15 feet to resolve the mess. I agreed on one condition. Every homeowner would receive a permanent reduction in fees once the HOA was restructured under lawful oversight. They accepted, because for once, the power wasn't on their side. It was on mine. 6 months later, Maplewood Heights looks different. No rulers on lawns. No intimidation notices. No selective enforcement. People wave again. Kids ride bikes through streets that don't feel hostile. And my garage? It holds exactly one vehicle. A restored 1985 Chevy pickup that never has to worry about trespass again. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth it. The stress, the retaliation, the risk. I always give the same answer. Bullies only win when everyone stays quiet. Delilah didn't lose because I was stronger. She lost because I refused to surrender what was mine. And that's the lesson she never understood. The knock came at 6:12 a.m. Not a polite knock. Not a neighborly knock. A law enforcement knock. When I opened the door, 2 county detectives stood on my porch, badges visible, expressions calm but serious. A third vehicle idled at the curb, unmarked government plates. "Mr. Caldwell?" One of them asked. "Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Delilah Thornberry." I stepped aside without hesitation. Inside my kitchen, they laid it all out. The hidden camera footage, the fraudulent HOA contracts, the fake legal notices, the unregistered HOA entity, the money trail leading straight to Delilah and her husband. They weren't here to question me. They were here to confirm the final pieces. "She's been interviewed," the detective said, flipping open his notebook. "She's denying everything. Says you're orchestrating a personal vendetta." I almost laughed. "Did she mention the hoes?" I asked. The detective's mouth twitched. "She did. Claimed it was a coincidence." I handed them a USB drive. "Here's the footage in full resolution. Timestamps intact. No edits." They nodded. Professionals. Methodical. Already convinced. Just verifying. Before they left, one of them paused at the door. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Most people back down when bullies escalate." I watched them drive away knowing something irreversible had begun. 3 days later, Delilah was arrested. Not at home, not quietly, but during a so-called emergency HOA meeting she called to restore order. 2 squad cars pulled up. Residents gathered. Phones came out. The charges were read out loud. Fraud, embezzlement, criminal trespass, harassment, vandalism, practicing law without a license. When the handcuffs went on, the silence was absolute. Her husband stood frozen, face gray, realizing construction contracts, the easy money, the intimidation. It was all over. The news cameras caught everything. The woman who once ruled Maplewood Heights with a clipboard was led away shaking Mascara Street, screaming that this was all a misunderstanding. No one believed her. Within a week, the HOA was suspended by the state. All fines were frozen. All enforcement ceased. Every homeowner received a notice explaining their rights. Refunds were issued. Some people cried when they opened those letters. Not because of the money, but because they realized how long they lived under fear for no reason. The community center was temporarily closed. Turns out, you can't legally operate a building that sits on stolen land. The city approached me about a settlement. They wanted to formally purchase the disputed 15 feet to resolve the mess. I agreed on one condition. Every homeowner would receive a permanent reduction in fees once the HOA was restructured under lawful oversight. They accepted, because for once, the power wasn't on their side. It was on mine. 6 months later, Maplewood Heights looks different. No rulers on lawns. No intimidation notices. No selective enforcement. People wave again. Kids ride bikes through streets that don't feel hostile. And my garage? It holds exactly one vehicle. A restored 1985 Chevy pickup that never has to worry about trespass again. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth it. The stress, the retaliation, the risk. I always give the same answer. Bullies only win when everyone stays quiet. Delilah didn't lose because I was stronger. She lost because I refused to surrender what was mine. And that's the lesson she never understood. The fallout didn't end with the arrest. That was just the moment everything became public. What followed was quieter, but far more devastating for Delilah. The court proceedings stretched on for months. Discovery alone uncovered years of falsified records, forged HOA votes, and intimidation tactics that have been normalized because no one dared challenge them, until someone did. During testimony, former board members folded one by one. They admitted they'd signed documents they never read, approved contracts they never reviewed, voted out of fear rather than agreement. The judge didn't hide his disgust. This HOA, he said during one hearing, functioned more like a protection racket than community association. That statement made it into the official record. Delilah's defense tried everything: stress, misunderstanding, clerical error, passion for community standards. None of it worked, because paper doesn't lie, and neither does video. Her husband took a plea deal. Thornberry Construction agreed to restitution and lost its municipal eligibility for 5 years. The company folded within months. Employees scattered. Equipment was auctioned. The empire collapsed quietly, like rot finally exposed to air. Delilah didn't get jail time immediately. She got something worse. Convictions, multiple counts, permanent removal from any HOA leadership role, heavy fines, civil liability from homeowners she'd bullied for years. People she thought were beneath her now testified against her, and every single one of them walked out taller. The HOA was officially dissolved, not restructured, not rebranded, dissolved. A court-appointed administrator replaced it with a voluntary neighborhood association. No fines, no enforcement powers, no intimidation, just basic maintenance and shared costs people actually voted on. Participation skyrocketed. Turns out people don't hate rules. They hate tyranny. As for me, I went back to my routine. Work, home, garage. The city finalized the land purchase and the check cleared. I put the money into a trust for neighborhood improvements, playground repairs, street lights, things that actually mattered. No plaques, no recognition. That wasn't the point. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Delilah at a grocery store. No clipboard, no entourage, no confidence. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. Some defeats don't need commentary. As I loaded groceries into my truck, I caught my reflection in the chrome bumper of that old Chevy. Scarred hands, tired eyes, steady posture. I hadn't changed. The system around me had. And that's the real ending. Not revenge. Not victory. Balance. Because when ordinary people stop tolerating abuse, power has nowhere left to hide.